Now, you definitely do not want to do this with the watering. Okay, so let's talk about some of the care requirements. These come from the wooded areas, the shady wooded areas. Now, how much shade is a topic for debate, but they do prefer to be more in the light, but not the direct sunlight. So when I put them underneath my benches, they do still bloom, but they take much longer than the ones that are up in the light. Now, of course, the caveat with that is that they don't want to be in the sunlight, because what you'll find is as soon as they're in the sunlight, the whole thing will flop. All the blooms will flop down and wilt, all the leaves will flop down and wilt, but they have an amazing ability to bounce right back. Even if they're like that for a few days, it's very, very rare for one to actually wilt and die within at least a week, in my experience. Not that I've actually left them for a week, but I know when I went away on holiday and they returned and they hadn't been watered, they still recovered. Of course, I don't know how long they were actually wilted for, but I do believe it was a while. So talking about the watering, what you definitely do not want to do is you do not want to give them too much so that they are sitting in a pool of water. Now, I have them in these gravel trays, and that really isn't the best thing to have them in. I have them in that because I don't want the water to drip through to the floor because of electrics and so on and so forth, and one or two other reasons. But I then raise them up on some gravel so they're not completely sitting in the water. For a lot of plants like this, you expect them, because they're from a shady, woody area, to be used to sitting next to streams and to be constantly wet. These don't. I don't actually know what the exact habitat is like. I've never seen it, and I can't find any footage of it on the web, but I do know from experience that if you water these so that they drain through and they then sit in that water, they will act as if they've not had enough water and they will still wilt. So wilt if you water them, wilt if you don't. So what you really need to do is just give them enough to wet the first few centimetres of the media. Now, how do you know that? Well, it's guesswork, really. You've got to get used to the feel of the plant, get used to knowing how heavy it is when it's wet and how heavy it is when it's dry, and get used to the feel of the leaves. You'll be able to sense how turgid they are. So I very often just do this with them when I'm walking past, and if they're quite floppy and heavy in my hand, then I know that they're likely to need a water, and I just give them a little squirt, just enough to wet the top, and that seems to be enough. They seem to prefer to be on the drier side. That's what I've found through my experience. Of course, your plant's requirements in your particular environment might be slightly different, so just take that, not exactly with a pinch of salt, but take it as a little bit of information to help you come up with your own ideas about what your plants need. Hopefully it's helpful in that way. And now we miraculously have a different plant. This is one of the crystal ice ones. So, little word about pests and a little word about leaves. So these leaves, as this season goes on, they get longer and longer, and yes, for me anyway, they do get in the way. So it's really easy just to snip them off or even tear them off with your fingers. If you want to make them into a point, that's fine. I just tend to cut straight off. They do that themselves anyway. You'll find that very often they will produce like a straight line, as if somebody's drawn a line across a leaf, and they will die back up to that line. That has a name. It's called abscission, and it means that the leaf will die back up to a certain point. Perfectly natural thing to do. They also lose some of those leaves over winter, but what my point is, if those leaves get in the way, if you've got the kind of environment that I've got where they're all kind of cheek by jowl, then you can cut them off, you can shorten these, they'll always produce new ones. It's certainly not a problem. So pests, they're pretty pest free for the most part. I've found that slugs, although they'll crawl all over them, they'll slime all over them and leave their trails everywhere, they don't actually like the taste of them. They don't seem to anyway. I'm guessing that's the problem. They don't take big chunks out of them. So slugs are okay. Snails, same kind of thing. Aphids like the flowers. Unusual, they normally like the leaves, but in this case, in Streptocarpus case, aphids like to congregate underneath the blooms and along the bloom stems. Now, aphids are pretty easy to get rid of with like a soap solution, but this one also gets tarsonimid mite. I have a video which I'll put a card up to maybe towards the end, and tarsonimid mite for me has been my biggest pest. It does distort the leaves and it makes the leaves die off right towards the centre, towards the rib. You'll know if your leaf starts to go brown, starting from the rib, starting quite low down in the plant and then works its way up. It could well be tarsonamid mite. Now the solution for that is either buy an organic control or use a systemic. I've used systemics on these, and even though it works really well, it does certainly get rid of the mite, it gets rid of aphid, gets rid of mealybug and so on. It can cause mutations, and I've had leaves that are mutated, I've had blooms that are mutated. Cut them off, the new growth that comes then is okay, although I am trying to get away from using chemicals if I can possibly help it. But of course plants cost a lot of money, don't they? And well, people can make their own mind up about that. The other pests which are a pain are vine weevils. You'll find that for this kind of plant, vine weevils love to get inside, even if you think there's no room for them to get in because it's so tightly packed. They'll find their way inside there, they'll lay their eggs, and then that little rub that comes up will eat away all the roots, and the only time you'll know about it is when the thing dies. Now the thing about Streptocarpus is they're so easy to propagate that even if you then manage to completely get rid of those grubs, you should still be able to recover your Streptocarpus. So what I do, if there's any sign of vine weevil in the springtime, because that tends to be when you see them, and in fact I have a video somewhere from this year where that happened to me, then I will go around and I will treat every single Streptocarpus. In fact, I'll treat every single plant I've got in the greenhouse that has the kind of media that a vine weevil larva likes to live in. They don't like to live in things like orchid pots with bark and loads of earth spaces. They're like a traditional multimedia style compost where it's closely compact around the roots, and they'll eat all the roots, and that is one of the main things. Of course, if it's in a house, it's not really a problem. It's only if it's in this kind of situation where it's open to the elements and all the bugs. Okay, you can see from this Streptocarpus, Bethan, can you see how the blooms are beginning to wilt? Now that's not that they're going over, this is because they are in the sun behind the glass. There is lots of shading up there, so it won't kill it, but it's really suffering in this afternoon heat of 32. So that will be one that definitely needs a water as soon as I've finished filming this video. As far as blooms go, as soon as the blooms are over, snip them off. They get these kind of elongated seed heads. I think you can collect the seeds. I do believe they're okay to sow, but it's not something I'm really interested in doing. I find the best way of propagating them is by leaf propagation, which I have a video coming up at the end of this particular video as a card. So if you're interested in propagation, go and click that one at the end. But this one definitely needs a bit of a water. We've said snip off the spent blooms, then make sure you snip off the bloom stalk as far back as you can get it. If you miss any and cut them a little too high up, then they end up with like a stalk. And just see there, because I've missed that one, just like a stick that's left. Doesn't do it any damage, easy to pull off. I would try and cut it as low down as you possibly can. Sometimes the blooms don't always open out. I'm not sure the reason for that, but sometimes you'll see that on a plant you've got some tightly closed up buds and they just never seem to open out. Better to cut them off, don't leave them forever, because they're not going to open. If they don't open within a day or two, they're not going to open. They want to be fed all through the growing season, which is most of the year, to be honest. When it comes round to, for the UK anyway, December, November, December, that's when they're really going over. There's a few left in December, definitely the crystallized varieties, but I always stop them. I stop watering them quite as much. I stop feeding them. So you should fertilize them all through the year. And you can get from Dibley's, where I get a lot of my Streptocarpus from if you're in the UK. They do have some little feeding tablets that you just pop in once a month. I've also used the feeding sticks, which last a little bit longer. You can get them from anywhere off Amazon. They're not that fussy when it comes to fertilizer. They do want some feed, but it doesn't have to be a specific type. Just a general purpose feed will do them really well. And you do notice the ones that are fed, I should say, so it's definitely worth doing, but you don't want to feed them in the off season. So at the end of the season, and this is where again I have another video for this, at the end of the season I give them a tidy up. It shows you what to do in the video, and then I will repot it if it needs repotting. Don't feed it, hold off the watering, let them stay dry for a longer period of time, and then you're off again, hopefully for an early start by March, kind of April time. Now we've got the polka dot purple here, lovely blooms as usual. So this one is really prolific flower, not quite as tall as some of the other varieties that I've seen, but really very eye-catching blooms on this one. Really benefits being in a larger pot. But what do you do if yours doesn't flower? If you've got to July and it's not bloomed, I would say actually even if you get to April and they've not started blooming, the chances are that they're just not in a bright enough position. As I mentioned before, and I did show you earlier on, that underneath the benches where it's a little bit more shady, they do bloom, but they take longer to get to that stage. So I would definitely, if you can see that there's no pest, you've ruled that out, they're still not blooming, have a look at the light aspect that you've got it in and move them to a place that's a bit more light. But remember, keep them out of that direct sun. So as I absolutely melt here in whatever it is in the greenhouse at the moment, we're up to 37 now because I've no fans on, I want to leave you with a question of the day. So my question is, what is your favourite Streptocarpus or Streptocarpella hybrid? Or it might even be a species. Is there one that I'm not growing that you really like? Or maybe one of mine that you really like? Maybe it's the Kalahari, maybe it's the polka dot purple. Write in the comments, tell me what it is that's your favourite. And if you've got any questions about Streptocarpus, or even if you think that I'm doing something wrong and there's something I could do to improve my care of them, I'm certainly not the font of all knowledge on them. Don't forget, I'm talking about what's happened in my greenhouse, in my situation. It might be completely different for you. I'd love to hear from you. So please write that in the comments down below. And just before we go, if you're interested in Streptocarpus propagation, have a look at the video I'm going to show you right now. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.